Everyone and their mom is yelling on the internet these days. What people think is motivating is actually making me just see your insecurity. I am a recovering control freak. I'm trying to control things to get things done is really you operating in your business out of fear. You can only trust others in your business if you truly trust yourself. If I'm just like more of a commanding presence in my life and business, but I'm not in control, what does that mean? Because I don't know what that life looks like. The most important skill that you can have as a leader, as a CEO, is to know and understand how to persuade with your commanding presence without having to raise your voice. Hello and welcome back to Ambitious. Today, we are talking all things about control as the CEO in your business. And today, we're going to be talking about two C's, which are the difference between command and control, because they are very different things. And I think many people in business get these two confused, which is that by controlling, you are commanding the energy within your business. And many people don't know, how do I command authority or command results or outcomes in the business without feeling like I need to control? And so today we're going to be breaking down really what this looks like when you've mastered this. And this is something I wanted to talk about because I see so many entrepreneurs, CEOs, operators, leaders of businesses who feel like the only way to get ahead, the only way to see results is by trying to control literally everything and anything in the business at a given time. And so there really is a big difference between being the woman and the leader who really commands attention from clients, from team members, from those who see your brand versus those who feel like you have to control everything around you in order to feel safe within your business. And I would say, like, the reason that this is important for us to discuss is because there is one side, which is the fact that being a commanding presence, being a commanding brand means that you are like magnetic. Like you feel like your energy when it walks into a room, your energy when it shows up on social media has this ability to just stop everybody in their tracks and make them focus, pay attention, and get things done or get to the outcome that you want them to go to. On the contrast, control for most people, the overarching feeling or experience of that is going to be exhaustion. You are going to feel like when you are trying to be in control of everything, you are just exhausted because you are genuinely holding space for so many things at one time. And so, why does this really matter? Well, because control, if you are someone who feels like, maybe you are like a self identified control freak, or you feel like you're someone who's been told maybe that you're someone who really likes control, by being the person who needs to be in control all the time, what I want you to know is that's actually a fear-based operating system. So the reason it's important to talk about and the reason it's important for us to uncover within you is because if we don't know this about ourselves, it may mean that what we believe is like, I'm trying to control things to get things done, is really you operating most or entirely in your business out of fear. And so we want to make sure that when we're operating in the business, we're doing so from a place of command and not control, because command is what actually generates trust within others. It's actually what allows our presence and what we say and how we say it to resonate with other people. And it also is the thing that, as a result of those two things, will get us better results. This is the thing that I think kind of breaks people's brain about the idea of releasing control. Is they're like, how could I release control and get better results than if I just did it all myself? And that unlock really is the unlock of scaling a business, because scaling a business is never about you controlling every piece. It's actually about releasing control, but doing so in an intentional way. And so we're going to break down today how this kind of trickles into everything, right? We see how the difference between control and command can show up in many different departments of the business. It shows up in sales, it shows up within clients and specifically client boundaries. It shows up within your team, so your team management, your team leadership. It shows up without a doubt in your personal brand. This is something that I would say is like the personal brand aspect is probably the easiest for you to identify. That person that you feel like she just shows up in such a way within her marketing or such a way within her delivery of her offerings. You've seen her speak on stages, you see her speak on a podcast, and you're like, she just has this like commanding presence, and I can't quite put my finger on it. If you feel like that is something that activates you, that is going to be the basis of today's episode, is letting you become that commanding presence within the room. And also, most importantly, this is going to trickle down into your personal life, because we know that many times how we do one thing is how we do many things. And with that, if you are someone who feels like you need lots of control in your business and you're trying to control every little piece, every little person, 9 times out of 10, that's also going to translate into your personal life, which is the fact that you probably are the type of person who feels like you feel the most safe, you feel best within your personal life or your day-to-day life when you're the one in control. And so with this, I really want to first start with breaking down and making it really clear, what is the difference between command and control? So let's start with control, because control is going to be the thing that most of us can easily recognize, especially if we are those quote unquote control freaks. And I also want to say there's no judgment here. I have been known in my life and within my business to be somebody who has definitely been in the bucket of control, meaning I'm someone who likes to feel like I have things a certain way. I like to be able to get certain outcomes and certain results. And it's also because of this that I feel like I'm very equipped to talk about this, because I am a recovering control freak, if you will, within my own life and my own business. And so control and what that looks like. First, you're going to note it is driven by fear and it's driven by anxiety. So you might find that anytime you try to release control, you physically or emotionally or mentally get a response in doing so. You feel anxious and literally on edge that someone's going to mess something up if you're not involved, that if you give it away to someone, you're not sure what's going to end up happening. It literally gives you anxiety to think about not being in control, or you have tons of fears that come up for you of what could happen or what could unfold if you're not tightly holding the reins. It also, we find with control, it is in the basis of giving ourselves an illusion of certainty in really what all of us need to acknowledge is uncertain environments. So, entrepreneurship is like the biggest roller coaster, right? We have a new thing happening around every corner. And first, we have to fall in love with that process. But sometimes the way that we stay safe within that process of the fact that everything's changing all the time, we start to train ourselves to kind of be able to adapt, to be able to respond to things. And then before we know it, we're like, okay, I'm the only one who knows how to navigate these waters. I'm the only one who knows how to drive this roller coaster. So I'm going to stay at the forefront of this, because that allows us to try to stay as safe as possible in all of these uncertain environments, because things are constantly changing. With that, we want to realize that doing so is giving us the illusion, and that's a really important word to anchor into. By trying to control everything in uncontrolled environments of entrepreneurship, all that that's doing is giving you the illusion of certainty, the illusion of being able to predict outcomes versus the reality of what it is, which is the fact that it is unpredictable. And with this, we find that control is also very rigid. I find that a lot of the people that I interact with are very rigid in their thinking when they are someone who needs to be in control. You're not having a lot of fluid conversations. You're not having a lot of, well, what if it looked like this? Or what if we could do it this way? You're more in the bucket of like, this is the way we're doing it. And here's why we're doing it that way. And that's the conversation over. And with that, you're also going to find sometimes in the control bucket, we also have a lot of reactiveness. Like we have this reaction, this reactiveness that happens in the things in our environment. So you genuinely probably believe that you need to hang on to everything right now and you need to hold space for it and you need to be in the driver's seat. Otherwise, there's a high likeliness that it's going to fall apart. And you're probably going to identify with this if you're the type who micromanages. You feel like you over communicate every little nitty gritty detail. You don't leave room for other people to think, because that makes you anxious and fearful that they might think something that you wouldn't think. And with this, you don't only correct or provide feedback, but you overcorrect, you overdo it. And you really try to be 17 steps ahead of manufacturing every little possible outcome or or circumstance that could happen. So you're not only thinking of a plan B, you're thinking of a plan C, D, E, and F if something should happen within your business or within your life. Now, on the contrast, command, right? So if we want to be more in a command presence within our business, it means that we're rooted in self trust and we're rooted in our personal authority. We are super intentional with the way in which we present, the way we communicate, and the things that we communicate about. And that really allows us to be truly magnetic in the way that we interface with people, whether that is within our brand, our marketing, our team, our clients. And the mindset around those that command and have a commanding presence is that you trust yourself. Okay. So you trust the structure that you've set out in your business and you trust others to meet you to that structure. And so this is a really clear, important distinction for me is that you can only trust others in your business if you truly trust yourself. And that is because, as we know, you've heard me talk about before, everything starts and ends with you. So, like, if I have a team member that I'm going to delegate something to, the only reason that I'm anxious around giving said team member something is if I have some fear of the fact that maybe I don't have clarity on how to navigate it if it doesn't go well. Maybe I fear that I haven't given that person proper training. I fear that they don't have the skills that they might need or that I haven't provided them with those skills to do that task, right? If you're having something come up, it oftentimes, if we really start to unravel it, leads back to you, which is the fact that you don't trust yourself, and because you don't trust yourself, you can't trust giving it to anybody else because you don't feel like you barely even have a grasp of it. And so, with that, you want to remember that commanding presence is really rooted in clarity. So, you kind of have a vision, you have an understanding of what's going to happen and why you're going to have it happen the way it does. You're going to be calm. This is the most important, like, bing, 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 like awareness for me when I see somebody is if someone is like, fast talking, twitching, yeah, like this, and they're go, go, go. If you are not calm in the way that you communicate, it tells me that there is an underbelly of that, which is insecurity and fear. Because people who are certain and calm are those that we typically feel like we can trust in. People are who are sporadic and all over the place don't feel grounded, and they're not grounded because they're not confident in what it is that they're trying to do or how they're doing it. There is a symbol for sure when it comes to commanding presence, which is the fact that you are actually present in the moment. So you have this really incredible ability to take a present moment and make it contextual for everybody versus thinking entirely in the past or entirely in the future. Now, with this, I want to give you an example. So, a controlling business owner will need to monitor every single task, for example, that a VA is doing. You might even be going so far as to go in and rewrite the email that that VA prepped or rewrite the message that that VA was going to send. Whereas, if you, on the contrast, were more of a commanding business owner, we would be the kind of person who would set expectations of how you typically do communication. You would provide different reviews or opportunities for feedback, and you would do so with giving them structure, but also keeping your authority of how you want it done, meaning keeping the vision of your standards, but also giving that person authority to say, I trust you to have the skills, have the perspective, have the beliefs or values that if something should come up, that you'll kind of work within the guidelines of how I would operate. And so I really do think that many people, the reason I wanted to kind of define the difference is you'll probably identify what it feels like for you. So, like, I wouldn't say most of us are like, I'm a controlling business owner, right? It's not something we necessarily always identify with until we feel like we see the symptoms and we go, wait a second, that is how I'm operating right now, though, or that is how I'm showing up right now. And so it starts to presence for us maybe areas of opportunity where we can say, okay, great. If I am in the command bucket and I really am a commanding energy, then with this, how can I lean deeper into that? How can I finesse that and master it further? On the contrast, if you are more of a control type of energy, it's an opportunity to say, how do I adjust this and, change this within my business so I'm not capping my own growth? And so I really want to, you know, break down, because control, again, is the one that we don't want to have. We don't want to be showing up in a controlling way in our business. I want to give you some tangible examples that I noted down of ways that control is going to show up tactically within your business. So, things like you are in control mode if you're constantly double checking your team's work. So, they go and they do something and they may have done it perfectly 15 times over, but you are like, I just need to triple check. I just need to make sure that I go through it one more time. You feel a need to explain yourself 3 to 4 times over to really make sure that people understand what you're saying, whether it's team, clients, marketing. You feel like you really need to make sure that people are getting it. You get uncomfortable when someone else does something differently than you. And this is actually another thing that I see as a distinction. Not only are they doing things differently than you and it makes you anxious or fearful, but sometimes it really scares you when you give it to somebody and you let them do it differently. And in doing it differently, they still get the outcome. They still are able to get the outcome or the results, sometimes in a better, faster, easier way than you. And you think, whoa, that wasn't my process. What's going on here? So you feel really uncomfortable when you see someone doing something differently because it's not your way. You are known to over deliver and stretch boundaries because you do not want to disappoint people. This was something that I saw within a couple clients that I've worked with. And they're like, really, really overdoing it kind of thing, right? When it comes to delivery in their programs. I'm like, we're not talking high level delivery. We're talking overdoing it, almost basically like going in and doing it for the person, right? So I want you to think like, say I'm a personal trainer, they would be the person who'd be like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to bring you your meals to our next session. Like I had someone I was working with who was in the marketing space and they were so frustrated that clients were not doing what they wanted them to do that they literally started to get into done for you work, meaning like they basically were like kind of shadowing it as an agency. And I was like, whoa, 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 what's happening here? And that was because the clients weren't doing it perfectly the way that this person wanted it done. So they really overstretched their boundaries and they over delivered within the offer that they had, which was a coaching offer. It was not even a done for you opportunity or offering. And that was because they really wanted to have the outcomes done their way. And over delivery within a service or over delivery within an offer is oftentimes connected to the fact that you are really scared to disappoint people. You are really scared that someone's not going to do it the exact way that you intended it or the exact way that you instructed it. And as a result, it's not going to work. And if it doesn't work, they're going to think it's because of me. And you start to spiral down creating all of these different connections and stories. You probably are somebody as well who obsesses over the nitty-gritty details. You're obsessing over your launch numbers, you're obsessing over your follower count, you're obsessing over client reactions to things. You are obsessive about response and you're obsessive about feedback. You really take a lot of feedback in numbers, in followers, in clients to be indicative of your success or in the fact that you are successful with those people. And you ask for input. And this is a really key one that I see is people who ask for input but don't want to take any of it. So you're asking your team maybe for ideas. You're asking your clients for ideas. You're asking your maybe even spouse for ideas. You're asking everybody for ideas, but then even when you bring in those ideas and you do consult the panel around you, you're still not doing anything with that information and you're sticking to the original plan, which is what you wanted to do in the first place. So that really is because you have this belief that only you really know and only you can really get it right. But you kind of humor yourself with asking other people first in the illusion that you're trying to be collaborative when really you're sticking to the original plan. Control on a deeper level, if we go a little bit, even deeper under the surface within this, control is often coming from a deep fear of being misunderstood, of failing, or of losing some aspect of safety. And, we're not going to get too deep into the mindset side because that would be its own episode. But there is actually an aspect of control, which is a trauma informed response to chaos. So when somebody has been in moments of trauma. And again, when I say trauma, I'm not necessarily saying, big T trauma. It could be on the variety of the spectrum of trauma. But when you've been in a moment in your life where you have been out of control, it's not uncommon to then, after a situation or after an experience, to then have the desire to control everything. And that is because, again, we talked about the illusion of safety. It means that in your brain, not consciously, you're not waking up and being like, I'm going to be controlling today, right? You're really having the illusion of safety because you're telling your brain, if I try to control everything, it means that I am doing as much as I possibly could to control my external environment, which in turn means that I'm as safe as I possibly could be because I've thought of everything and I'm holding space for all of it. It's a way to basically protect yourself from being hurt again in some capacity, whether that's mentally, emotionally, for some people physically. It's really your trauma informed response of how to put this protective layer around you. Because if you're in control of everything, the likeliness that something can hurt you in your mind is less, even though in reality, it might be the same amount. So there's that aspect of it, but there's also the other lens, which is failure, right? So if, for example, you grew up with a lot of feedback from maybe parents or people that were major role models or big figures in your life, and you had a lot of messaging around what it meant to fail or what failure looks like, and you had a lot of feedback around that, then if failure was this big scary thing to you, of course you're going to try to control your business because what you're doing is you're trying to control every piece that could or may possibly impact the outcome. And so I saw this with, I had a client who was like, I would say, and they knew this, they were very, very, very controlling within their business. And so when we started to dive into it, I realized that this was not anything other than her relationship with her mom. Her mom had been the kind of person who was like, it's perfect or it's nothing, was the way that she was raised. And so then for that to be her upbringing, which then came through with some mindset sessions we did, that unraveled into now saying, okay, in her business, it's either perfect or it's not done. It's either perfect or it needs change. And it made sense because her entire upbringing, she was told if it's not perfect, she's failed. So, of course, in an effort to make something perfect in her business, i.e., in order to be successful, it had to be perfect. And to have it perfect, she had to control everything. The other one I would say that, is kind of a little bit in connection to this as well is like if you grew up in an environment where things were not in your control. So like I had another peer who was definitely somebody who feels like and still kind of navigates this feeling of, wanting to have control over everything. And it was interesting because I said, where do you think that comes from? And he said, well, my parents had struggled with alcohol and had struggled with addiction. So because of that, I had so much instability within my home. I had so much instability growing up. There wasn't like a routine, there wasn't a schedule, there wasn't like calm going home. You never knew what you were going to walk into. So, because of that, their life and their environment is like they triple think of every situation. Like anything that he thinks of a plan B, C, D, because that is really how he protects himself from all these situations that he might interface. But the problem was it created this really, really deep sense of burnout because with trying to think of all these situations of, well, what if this happens and what if that happens? It started to spiral that every single initial situation actually became two, three, four different situations because of this trauma response. So, this is also the reason I mentioned the trauma response aspect is because I think many of us think, and we've talked about this in other episodes, right? We have this identity sometimes with things that we've been given as a label. So if someone says to you, like, oh, I'm just a control freak, or I'm just like, I've always been this way, you can, know that about yourself, but it also doesn't mean that you have to keep that about yourself. And so that's also something that I would invite you to, which is to say, you know, first, do you resonate with any of maybe these quote unquote symptoms of being more in a controlled state? If you resonate with the symptoms, it's to then ask yourself, okay, well, if I wanted to kind of dive into that, is there anywhere that I could see where maybe that comes from? And then most importantly, which is the essence of it all, is are you actually really willing to change that? Are you really interested if you are the kind of person who needs tons and tons of control? Are you ready, willing, and able to release some of that if it meant that you could have a better life and that you could have a better business? And I think for many of us, we want that, but we don't necessarily know, well, if I wasn't controlling, what would that look like? Because again, this may be the only reality that you've known. And it's not to say, and I want to take a second because controlling is not always a choice. So I think many of us believe that, like, oh, if you're just a control freak, you're just the kind of person who loves to control things. I would really invite you to look at control is typically a byproduct of something else that's happening underneath the surface. Could be fear, could be trauma response, could be the fact that there is, some other experiences that we haven't kind of dealt with yet. All of this, though, to say being a controlling person is not always just a personality trait. It's usually oftentimes at the root something else, and then it just presents as control as one of the symptoms of how it's showing itself. So when we think about going from being this controlling person to being the opposite, for many, including myself, by the way, I didn't know what that meant. Like if I was like, if I'm just like more of a commanding presence in my life and business, but I'm not in control, what does that mean? Because I don't know what that life looks like. I don't know what that feels like. And so, again, we want to go back to the fact in contrast that a commanding energy feels very embodied, it feels very grounded, and it feels very certain. It's not about being cold, it's not about being bossy. So, again, when we hear commanding, we might think like, oh, she's very demanding. It might be the thing that we think of that. But I want you to think about maybe a situation where maybe you've gone out to socialize and someone's entered a room or someone's been around you and they just feel like their presence, they haven't even said anything. Their presence just feels very grounded and very confident and very certain. And you just go, wow, that person has just like really got like a beautiful, like, presencing energy. It's that. It's not to say that I want you to go walk in and bring some Beyonce energy. Obviously, if that's what feels good to you, by all means. But it's to say that you can have a presence and an energy that is effective, that allows you to get the same results as you might get in any other situation with a very different experience. So when you're operating from more of a command energy, you're showing up with saying less words, but they land. Like I have a peer and he does not say much. Like he doesn't speak physically a lot of words. Like volume wise, he doesn't say a lot of words. But when he speaks, he will say like two sentences and you're like left pontificating about life. Like it's just, it lands in such a deep way that you instantly go into this like deep self reflection and you think, huh. And like he didn't say much. A man of very few words, but the words he does say are always very thought out. They're very intentional and they're very deep. They're not necessarily something that he doesn't just kind of just blah, 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 and chat all the time. But when he speaks, you know it's going to land because it's intentional and it's grounded. It's also, I find that someone who's really a commanding presence is not in the kind of business or lifestyle of like setting ultimatums. They just have standards. They just have these standards from which they show up. They have standards from which they operate. And if something doesn't meet those standards, they don't try to negotiate, they don't try to convince, they don't try to do anything. They show up in the standard of what they expect, and if it doesn't fit that standard, then they just kind of don't participate. They just don't engage because they're so, again, calm and centered and confident within themselves. That easy indicator of someone who has a commanding presence is also somebody who has the ability to delegate fully. So you are someone who can release attachment. You have structure in the way that you delegate, but you also allow for space and fluidity. So, like, set the structure, but you hold the space. And the way that I kind of think about this as an analogy is I almost want you to think about a bowling lane, and I do once in a while use the bumper lanes. I was playing with a child, okay? So to be fair, he was also using bumper lanes. But I picture a bowling alley with bumper lanes. And I think about those two bumper lanes on the bowling alley. A good leader, a good business owner has those bumper lanes on that bowling alley, but they allow the fluidity of someone to find themselves within it. That is effective leadership. It is not about telling someone, here's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And everyone's big thing with delegating, again, in the control, is that they don't want someone to think, because if someone thinks, they might think wrong. And if they think wrong, well, then there goes the business. So the belief in a control type perspective is that if I control everything they do and think, they could never think something wrong. They could never do something wrong. Now I'm safe. Instead, someone who has more of a commanding presence sets structure for a team member. They set structure even for clients. They'll set those bumper lanes, which basically help to keep someone within a certain range. Those are their standards, those are their bumper lanes, okay? But when they delegate, they also recognize the person needs space and fluidity to find and have their own thoughts within that structure. And because they allow someone to do that, they typically have way better results, way faster, because the person's really actually using their own brain. They're developing a skill set, they're developing a perspective. Whereas if you don't use it, you lose it, which means if I'm in a job where I'm following like step by step by step by step, I'm not having critical thinking. I'm not having the ability to be self led as a team member because I'm not having to think. I'm not having to strategize. I'm not having to solve problems because everything is a predetermined manual because it's all in control. If you really want to build an effective, like powerhouse team, you have to realize that people need standards, but they also need space. And so that comes to the delegation piece, but then also the easiest way that you can see this within marketing, and you'll know probably people off the top of your head that you can think of. You know, the people who seem like they're constantly pressuring you within marketing? Like it feels like everything is a countdown, get it now before it's gone. You've got to do it now. It's all about now. Like it's always this like pressure, 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 pressure. If you are seeing someone market pressure within their marketing, it's a clear indicator that that person is actually operating from a place of control. They're trying to control every moment, every person, every lead, every conversation. On the contrast, if someone's really in a commanding presence in their marketing, you're going to see that they show up with this calm, grounded energy, and they also have a lot of clarity. You feel like every time they speak, they're very well spoken. They're very clear on what they're saying and how they're saying it and why they're saying it that way. It just feels like it flows. And you can tell that when they market, they don't have this urgency and pressure and push around needing to have a certain outcome in a certain amount of time. And so this is really where you kind of see the energy of like, this is what I have. Here's, who it's for and what it does. And here's how to know if it's for you. Versus the energy, which is like, you need this because you need to be here and you need to be doing this in this amount of time and you're never going to change unless you do this. People who have, and I think people really don't know how they present sometimes in marketing because there are people who are quote unquote big in the space, big in, as a brand or as a personal brand, who don't realize that what they think is showing up as persuasive, what they think is showing up as, activating people to move is really just pressure. And the pressure to me, and I was talking about this even with someone on our marketing team, and I was saying what people think is motivating is actually making me just see your insecurity because it means that there's so much lack, there's so much scarcity, there's so much uncertainty, there's so much lack of confidence that I'm going to scream at you because that's the way that I persuade. The most important skill that you can have as a leader, as a CEO, is to know and understand how to persuade with your commanding presence without having to raise your voice. And I know this is going to ruffle some feathers because everyone and their mom is yelling on the internet these days. And what people don't realize is by yelling, you're not the one who's persuading. Like you're creating this emotional distraction from what would actually make something land. And so, yes, if you want to really create movement within your marketing, it's not about being louder, it's about having your message land more. Okay? I'm just going to repeat that one more time. If you want to have your message actually resonate with people, it is not about making it louder. It is not about cranking up the volume and being more angry and more spicy and more loud. It is about making sure that what you're saying and how you're saying it lands with the consumer. This is why you will see some people who are yelling on the internet and you will see other people who are calm, centered, and grounded And the people who are centered and grounded are making more sales. And everyone's like, but they're not having to persuade anybody. Yes, because their energy is commanding. They're not trying to control people's behavior and beliefs. They're able to let it land in someone and realize that they have certainty and confidence that that person is going to go through the journey that they just planted within them. So instead of trying to convince someone to buy, a commanding entrepreneur is going to know how what they offer changes lives. So you want to think when you are in a commanding energy as a marketer, you are not in convincing. Like the amount of times that I have been on a sales call with someone, or the amount of times I've even been in a sales conversation where someone has said, "Do I have to make a decision right now?" And I'm like, no, I'm going to be on the internet for the next 2 decades. Like, do you have to make a decision right now in this moment? No, because it would be BS pressure of me to say to that person, yes, you have to decide the next 20 minutes. Because her and I both know I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be here tomorrow. Now, maybe the offer that I had at the time might not be available. That's a fair, very realistic situation that could happen. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to pressure her that she has to move in the next 20 minutes or she can't work with me. What I tell her instead is like, listen, I'm not going anywhere. So if you have questions or if you are ready to move forward, message me and we'll go from there. And here's what I will tell you, because there's a lot of narratives to say that, being louder or screaming or whatever is what makes things work. I most recently did a launch and I really practiced this commanding energy. And so I went into situations where I knew my value and I knew my offer was great and I knew that these people needed it and that I, portrayed to them why they needed it. And I had people who would have a sales conversation with me and they would say, great, I'm going to take, X amount of time to think about it. And I would kind of go through the typical prompting questions. And if someone wanted to think about it, I would say, okay, great. And I didn't pressure them. I didn't follow up 15 times. I didn't, say, okay, like where are we at now? I realized my value and I also had confidence and clarity and certainty in them that if they were the people that I was going to be working with, and if I have kind of portrayed enough of what I think this offer could do for them, they would come to their own clarity. Fast forward, I, within a 1 week period, had like 5 to 6 people who were like, yes to our mastermind, all of which were not closed in a pressure type setting. They reached out to me and said, how do I sign? And that was because I didn't pressure them and I wasn't all up in their face and I wasn't saying, okay, well, what about now? And what about now? Where are we at? And what have you decided? I recognize that if I want to be self-led within my own business, I have to also realize that I need to, again, standards. I have to have the standard that other people are also self-led in their business, meaning I can't expect that if I want to be around those self-led entrepreneurs, that I'm going to find them by, helping and moving them every step of the way in the buying process. I have to realize that if I want to call that in of somebody through marketing, I have to embody that first in the way that I behave. And that is through marketing, that is through brand, and it is through sales process. You also are going to see that you will present the transformation, you will hold the energy in, and you will invite them in. You are not going to chase people. I am not in the business of chasing people down to work with me. And that's not from like an egotistical place. It's from a place of recognizing that the people that you want to work with, you're taking away their agency, their independence, and their individual decisions because you're trying to control it in your timeline. So I recognize that like I'm not going to chase people down. So if I send you a payment link and you don't process it, I'm not going to be like, well, what about now? What about now? What about now? What about now? Like you're your own person. And like you may have, because I know some of the people that I've chatted with listen to this podcast, you may have chatted with me and you think, okay, well, wow, she didn't follow up with me or she didn't kind of come back to me 15 times over, is what I mean by that. I'm not going to come back 15 times over. Listen, you and I both know you're a CEO and you know when you're ready. So that's why when it comes to commanding energy, and this is something I want for you too, I want you to have a commanding energy where you're not chasing anything. You're not chasing leads. You're not chasing people through marketing. You're not chasing clients. You have such an energy in the way in which you show up. that it sets the tone for how people interface with you, and they respect your time, they respect your opinion, and they respect the communication and conversations with you as a result. So, with this, I want to take the next few minutes to actually break down for you, how do you go from being someone who is in control and really having that controlling energy in the way you operate in business? And how do we start to shift that into being more of that commanding presence, more of the person who really has that clarity, that groundedness, that confidence within them? So, first, you have to catch the control when it's happening. So when you really distill it down, you have to have an awareness first. So it's always a classic thing of like, we have to, having an awareness of what you're doing is like the first step in creating any change. And it is true. Same in this situation. We do need to see that there is a need for us to first have an awareness of when and where we're being controlling. So ask yourself first, where am I gripping control right now? What are areas in my life where I am feeling urgency? I'm feeling the need to micromanage. I am obsessively checking on XYZ. What are those areas that you kind of feel like you're like really obsessing over these days? And maybe even the question of, where am I trying to force a result versus leading in a way that would lead toward one? Okay. So where are you gripping right now? Where do you feel urgency? Where are you micromanaging? And where might you be obsessively checking in on things in your business? And with that, where are you in your business trying to force a result instead of leading with action toward one? So again, are you checking Slack 20 times a day? Are you editing your team's work even though it's already 90% of the way there and done? Are you rewriting client emails because it's just faster if you just do it yourself? Okay, so check in first. Let's have that awareness to start of like, how is this kind of showing in my world and presenting itself? Second is really what I consider to be regulation, which is you want to pause and regulate before you respond. So, most control I find comes from dysregulation. So, lack of presence. Remember, we talked about commanding energy in people is typically a lot of presence. So, if you lack presence, you will typically be dysregulated. So, a nervous system will really look at a gap, a delay, or a deviation as a threat, right? So, we're looking at anything that kind of shakes us up as, again, someone else doing something, someone else having a new idea as a threat to us. So, to move into command, your nervous system is going to be challenged. So, when you give something to somebody and you say, here you go, and you used to give them step by step, don't think instructions, and now instead we give them bumper lane instructions and we allow them, structure with also space to find themselves. Your nervous system is not going to like it. And it's going to say, no, 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 this is not how we stay safe. When we stay safe, we do it all ourselves. Let's just keep it and we'll handle it because we can do it better. Your body and brain is going to need time to catch up. So, this is why having regulation is really important, because you have to recognize when you feel this feeling of wanting to hold it yourself, you have to know how to coach yourself through that. And the reason it's coach yourself through that is because you're not always going to have this in a perfect coaching moment opportunity. So, you're not going to struggle with a decision only when you're meeting with, for example, your coach. You're going to have this at 10 o'clock at night when someone messages you about something. You're going to have it in the morning at 9 a.m. when someone messages you about a question in Slack that they're like, yeah, I got it. I'm going to come up with it. And I want to say, even for myself, the regulation piece is still a constant awareness for me in my entire business, but it's also really in awareness for me when it comes to delegating. Because my natural tendency in delegation is I'll just do it. I'll just do it. I'll just do it. Like, that's still in my brain, something that I have to consciously turn off. And that's because I do sometimes have that natural response of like, I could do it fast, I could do it quickly, I'll just handle it. And while, yes, I could, it doesn't really help for the goals of what I want for the business. And it's not really helping me to grow. So when I think about regulation, I think about, the message I want to send on Slack of I'll do it. And I say, great, here's what I think would be really important when we do it. But if you want to do a mock up and send it over to me, I'm happy to give it a thumbs up before we proceed and, do this for all the posts. Right. So it's asking, instead of me controlling the entirety of it, how do I quality control? And that's something that I find for me helps me to kind of regulate that, which is to say, okay, I need to emotionally regulate myself. But then if I'm interfacing with somebody, how do I, allow myself to feel baseline? It's to say, okay, well, I'm not going to control the entire thing and I have to make peace with that. But how can I make sure that generally speaking, I have quality control, not control? So even when I think back to, like physical products, right? Like I was randomly, do not ask me why, I saw on a TV show one time and it was talking about Ben and Jerry's and how they have like this huge production line. And there's literally people in Ben and Jerry's, the ice cream, in the manufacturing center that are literally just there to quality control the ice cream. And they literally are meant to take random scoops each time and to, basically rate it between 1 and 10. So, are they going through every single tub and taking a bite? No, because that's ridiculous and that's something that's not possible at scale. But they still have quality control, which is to still say, you're not releasing everything entirely, but my body doesn't know the difference, which is why the regulation is important. So for me, and it sounds a little bit dramatic, but it's literally, again, something you're gonna have to coach yourself on. It's literally taking like deep breaths before you delegate something, or it's centering yourself to realize, okay, I'm gonna think about the worst case scenario of what could happen here, but even if the worst case scenario happened, how would I navigate that? And I kind of, for me, I have this self talk that I do when I feel like I'm getting in my own way when it comes to delegation. So again, you can do breathing. If you start to feel like you're like, oh my gosh, no, I can't give this to this person, take a step away from your business, create space, go outside, get some, sun on your skin. And another really important question is to say, what are you making it out to mean? So, like when you're delegating something, what are you making this to mean or to represent versus what it actually is? And that's something that I find is when people are really trying to control, there's a lot of stories going on in their head of what they anticipate or think is happening versus what's actually happening. And so I basically have to anchor into that just because something is uncertain to me does not mean it's unsafe. Okay. So just because something is uncertain does not mean that it is unsafe. It's a really important distinction because oftentimes, again, which is why regulation is so important, we don't know the difference between something being uncertain and unsafe. Sometimes, which is the basis of fight, flight, or freeze. We've talked about it in many different lenses within Ambitious, is that that response doesn't know that your delegating is any different than you running from a tiger. Your body feels it the same way, which is why when you try to do it the next time, it's going to try to protect you in that process. So when it comes to the ability to then go from, okay, I have an awareness that I'm being controlling. I have these moments where I can tell that I want to hold it, but I really want to change this. So I want to regulate and take a breath, a pause, a step away before the next step. You then have to recommit to your standards, not to your emotions. Okay, which is step 3, getting clarity and looking at the fact that you have to recommit to your standards, not to your emotions. So you want to remember that a commanding energy is not the kind of person who makes decisions based on the moment. It moves from the standard. So you want to ask yourself, what is, and the thing that you're doing, what is the standard here? Have I clearly communicated this standard to others? And this is like the ding, ding, ding. If I could like stop any person in a moment, it's this. If you are wanting to have a client do something the way that you're wanting, if you're wanting to have a team member doing something the way that you want, you have to ask yourself, have I even communicated the standards of my work? Because I will tell you more often than not, I talk to entrepreneurs who are like, Kate, it's common sense. And I'm like, there it is. It's not common sense. It's not common sense. Just because it's something that you feel is easy to you doesn't mean that another person has the same awareness or that they have the same thought process. Because something that might feel second nature or obvious to them might not be obvious to you, and vice versa for everybody. So when I feel like someone is struggling with their standards, so maybe you're like, okay, what is the standard? And then most importantly, have I communicated it? If you haven't communicated it, it's also part of why you're struggling with control. Because the reason you're upset someone's not getting the outcome in a program with your team, etc., the reason they're not getting the outcome that you want is because they're not following your standard. The reason they're not following your standard is because your standard was never communicated in the first place. right? So this is why, again, when we think about being controlling, control is something that typically when we unravel it, there's a deeper root underneath this as to how it's all connected. And you want to remember that control reacts, command reinforces. Okay. So a controlling energy is going to react to a situation, a commanding energy is going to reinforce. So you're going to reinforce the standard of something that you wanted. You're going to reinforce and provide feedback on this is what I was looking to achieve versus reacting to the fact that it was done poorly or reacting to the fact that it didn't hit the mark. So, for example, instead of resending a payment reminder with anxiety, you would just reinforce your policy, right? That's the difference of command. So, if someone, in your program, you're having an issue when it comes to this client's payment, it's not about reacting to, well, this client this and they said this, they're supposed to do this. It's like, hey, our policy around failed payments within our program is X. And so this is kind of the standard of for us what would be a next steps if you did need to have an adjustment when it comes to your payment. Versus the reactive emotional nature of someone who's in control is like, we need to send out the payment reminder. She needs to make that today. She owes me that payment, right? There's a very different energy in the way that you present within problems or situations that come up. Now, step 4 is to delegate fully and detach, which is trust. Okay. You can't command a business you don't actually trust to support you. Okay. You cannot command a business that you do not actually trust to support you. You cannot scale what you are controlling. So we have to shift your thinking. Instead of only if I can do it right, it needs to be I can lead others to do it well. Instead of what if they don't do blank, it should be what if they rise to the standard of X. So I always tell people in your business, scaling is not a matter of what you can do, it's a matter of what you can teach. And I will say that backbone thinking in your entire business will be the make it or break it of your ability to scale. Because if your entire business's success and its ability to scale is entirely based off of you doing everything, you don't have a business. You have a very high paid job, potentially. And I don't know for how long. Because when you're also controlling everything yourself, you can't hold space for all of that yourself. You can't manage and navigate all of that yourself. So it means that you won't have longevity because you're trying to do anything and everything. And what happens in that instance? You burn out. So the thing we want to remember is that when you delegate, you have to trust. And when I tell people, in questions with team, I say, do you trust your team members? And they go, yeah. And I'm like, okay, great. Let's stop there. Why don't we trust this team member? Well, because she doesn't do A, B, and C. I'm like, great. Where's her training? Where's her feedback? Where's her standards? Where's her values? Where's her principles? Where is the thing that is to guide her on the way in which you want it done? And my whole thing within my business is if I haven't taught it, if I haven't taught the strategy, I can't have the standard. So, when you're like kind of like quickly delegating something and you're quickly handing it off to somebody, if you have not given effective standards to the person when you delegated, you should not be surprised if that standard is not met when you get it back. And that's because we've set no structure. They've just had space, they had no bumper lanes. So if they go outside the bounds of what you would have had to be the bumper lanes, or maybe the bumper lanes in which they look like in your head but not documented, then that really means that you're giving someone free range. And when free range results come back, we can't be surprised. So we want to remember that it really does start with us. So, like command type of energy, you can trust the container in which you've built, right? You trust the standard. Whereas control, you're going to babysit that person every 5-10 minutes or what feels like every single day because you don't really trust them to do it. Number 5 is you want to audit your business for control points. You want to audit your environment. So you want to also look at asking yourself, does the environment in which your business is operating actually serve you and support you in seeing the clarity that you need to feel supported? Okay? So do your systems support me or do they make me feel like I need to hover? Are clients too dependent on me? And is that on them or is that on me? Does my team know what's expected, or are the expectations I have of them kind of in my head? So, with that, we have to ask ourselves these critical questions because even when someone, most recently, they were a social media agency and they came to me and they said, I just don't trust my team members because of XYZ. And so I said, okay, great. What would make you feel better? And she said, well, I would really love to be able to see when they're working on this, 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 and this. And I'm like, okay, amazing. If you could see that, do you feel like that would give you confidence to step back? And she's like, yeah, I feel like I just get stressed out about what they're doing because I can't see what they're doing. So I'm constantly asking and inquiring. So what we did is we focused with her team on building out her ClickUp and her internal systems to give her weekly reports of updates so she wasn't needing to contact the team. And since then, her contact with her team has diminished significantly. And that is because she doesn't need to constantly be checking in because she has it being presented to her now as a report that allows her to see what she needed that was causing the anxiety in the first place. So her thing was not actually the fact that she didn't trust the team members. Her thing wasn't even necessarily the fact that she didn't have the standards in place. She had all of that, but she didn't have the environment to give her what she needed to make her feel comfortable. So that really is what allows someone to step into a more commanding, grounded presence. So command is something that requires structure. So it's not a matter of structure to control, but it's structure to be able to feel like you have a well built house here that you can rely on. Versus control is typically something that usually thrives within chaos because, again, it allows you to be the fixer of all the problems. So things that you could look at would be, do you need to upgrade maybe SOPs? Do you need to adjust or refine some of your team workflows? Do you need to create better onboarding videos for clients if they're not, super clear as to what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to be doing it? If there's things that you need to communicate, it's your job to set those standards, those processes, and those systems in place. And lastly, you need to embody the energy in which you want to lead from. And you cannot command a business, a CEO, while you're thinking like a scrappy kind of like a one-off hobby or a one-off contractor in just like, I'm going to do this one-off project or one-off contract, right? Like if you want to run something that's like a company, an ecosystem, a business, you have to think about it as such versus how you would do it if you were scrappy and figuring it out on your own. You have to become the person who understands the role that you play within your business. So you have to realize I don't control, but I do set the tone of our expectations. I do not chase, but I do invite. I don't micromanage, but I do guide with clarity, right? So you want to remember that on a deep level, and we always talk about, right, like the idea that there's strategy, but then there's also the way that that synergy exists in your embodiment. So a lot of people want to see the outcomes of what a commanding energy is within their business, but they also don't want to do the work to say, am I showing up in a way that would produce those results? And if you're not showing up in a way that would produce those results, then of course you're going to always struggle. And the issue is not the strategy, it's your embodiment. And to, I guess, put it in simpler terms, if you want your team to feel like they can run with things, they need to know that you trust them to run with something. If you want your clients to be self-led, they need to know and see your embodiment, which is the fact that you require and you expect them to be self-led, meaning this is not a babysitting program. I'm going to be showing up in a way that causes you to really step into the version of you that you are ready and wanting to become. When you are embodied, and that sounds like a very woo word, I know, but when you're embodied, it means that the things that you say and the things that you tell people you believe are actually what you have integrated within your behavior. And so when you put it in your behavior, you have alignment between your words and your thoughts and your beliefs with your actions. So there's no like, well, she says one thing and she does another. And we want to remember that there's two ways that people learn from us, which is the way that they're taught, so what we tell people to think, and then there's the other side, which is what is caught, which is what people watch us do. And you want to remember as a leader and as a CEO that there's two things that we kind of have to keep in control at all times, which is the fact that some people are going to be taught your beliefs. They're going to be taught what you think. They're going to be taught what you want them to have as standards. And then there's the moments where you're not speaking at all and you're operating and you're making decisions and you're doing things and they're catching the way in which you move. And so there's like a witnessing of the embodiment versus what they're telling you to embody. So like I can tell you to be A, B, and C, but it's different if you and I are together somewhere and you're seeing me do those things in real time without saying a word as to why I'm doing them. You would witness somebody, you'd watch somebody operate a certain way versus telling you, hey, go be this way. And that's important because your clients see that, your audience sees that within marketing, and your team also sees that as well. Now, when you start to step into this, because my hope is that by learning all of this today, that you will start to really take some of these and put them into the day-to-day practices for yourself in the way that you show up, in the way that you operate in business. You're going to see clients are going to respect your time way more, and they're going to be really intentional about the way in which they navigate with you inside your services. Sales are going to feel cleaner. They're going to feel less effortful, less strenuous. You're going to feel like things are closing and it's not such a strain to get them to close. Your team's going to perform better. You're going to feel like they're more in line. And also with that, that they're more empowered to kind of take their individual departments or areas and really take it and run with it. You will stop being the bottleneck in your business, which is the most exciting thing because it means that you're not any longer going to be the cap of the reason that you're not growing. And you're going to attract more aligned opportunities. The thing that I would say has been the difference in like leading a certain way within business is the fact that things started to kind of fall into my ecosystem as a result of showing up that way. As a result of leading that way, there was different opportunities that came forward for me because people were like, great, we want that energy for our room to go to a speaking engagement, or we want that energy for our community to do a guest training. We want that energy on our podcast to have you on as a guest. And so things like those opportunities are also going to come from, again, the presence and the energy that you have in the way in which you show up and interact. So today is really an opportunity for you to first check in and ask yourself, do I feel like I'm operating maybe from control a little bit here? And if I am, to start to flex some of these muscles when it comes to commanding energy versus controlling energy, and realizing that as we step more into a command energy versus needing to control everything, you're going to see things shift in your business. And that by doing this, it's not going to happen overnight, but you will see, I will tell you, in a matter of 3, 6, even 9 months, you're going to see a very different experience within your business. And that's because you are showing up in a different way, which adjusts your behavior and the behavior of everybody around you because of that. So I would say, if you're one of those tactical type of people, how do I integrate this? You want to remember that this really starts with the work that you're going to do on yourself. This is not going to start just with your clients or just with your team. This actually has to start with you because you have to have full clarity of what it means to command in your business before you can ever really start to put that into tactics like setting standards, onboarding, offboarding, SOPs, and all those, more micro type pieces. So I hope today was helpful for you. And I'm really excited to see the way that this allows you to show up in this next wave within your business. And this is an invitation. This is not a critique. This was really today an awareness to bring it to the surface of which you are and to invite this new way in which you want to lead within your business. And so, as always, if there's something that maybe landed for you today and you feel like, there was maybe an area of your business that you kind of had some realizations, okay, wow, I realized I really am trying to control in this area. Or maybe you even just in listening today have decided that there's an area that you really want to start to embody more commanding energy and less of that control, reach out. I would love to hear from you in the DMs. My DMs are always open. So if there's anything that I can support with, or if you just even want to share some downloads that you had today, please feel free to do so. I'd love to hear from you. But with all that being said, I will see you on the next episode. And as always, stay ambitious.